I'm glad to be here. I grew up in India, but now live in the United States. I'm a physician by profession, and this is one of my passions that I do, go around presenting this seminar. So, without any further ado, let's begin. Allahu Akbar. That is the Muslim cleric, the mullah or the imam. He wants to call the faithful. Allah is the proper name of God in Arabic. Ho Akbar is great. Allah is great. What he really means to say is Allah is greater than any other. And with these words, he calls the faithful to salat, prayer, one of the 5 fundamental pillars of the Islamic faith. Shema Israel. Shema Israel intones a Jewish rabbi. He's got a kippur on his head and a talik, or the sacred shawl, around his shoulders, because now he is in the presence of the law and the prophets, the Torah. These are the words that Jehovah God gave Moses on Mount Sinai. Shema Israel. Adonai Elohinu, Adonai Akkad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord God, the Lord is one. Namo Amitabha. Namo Amitabha. That is the Japanese Tibetan. His Tibetan Japanese Buddhist, his Tibetan counterpart would say, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. That is transliterated to, oh, the jewel in the lotus. It is one of the most sacred chants of the Buddhists. Namo Amitabha. Namo means name. Amitabha is the name of a bodhisattva. Who is a bodhisattva? A bodhisattva is somebody who has reached the penultimate state of attainment in the Buddhist faith. The next stage would be a Buddha. But he refrains from being a Buddha yet because he wants to help human beings. And so at that stage, he presides over a paradise, and Amitabha presides over what is known as the Pure Land Paradise. There is no other name under heaven. That is the Christian bishop or the Christian preacher. No other name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved. And the name he refers to is Yeshua, Jesus, the Christ. The Christ meaning the Messiah, the Anointed One. The other names that he had were Emmanuel, God with us. Yeshua bin Maryam, Jesus the son of Mary. Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, deep in the Indian peninsula from where I come. Shaved head like mine, robed, bare feet. As they near the object of their pilgrimage, they break into a chant. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare is obeisance. Rama is the 7th incarnate of the god Vishnu. The triune gods of the Hindus, Brahma the creator, Shiva the destroyer, and Vishnu the preserver. And Rama is the 7th incarnate of the god Vishnu. Krishna is the 8th incarnate of the god Vishnu, who come down once in an age to help us human beings. Diverse, interesting, this religious world. But on the other side of the fence stands the person who does not believe in any of these. He is the atheist. And he looks upon these people who have all these chants and all these prayers and all these claims, and he says, oh, poor deluded souls, sipping at the Marxist opium of the masses, because that is what Karl Marx called religion. Opium of the masses. You guys don't know how to face the reality of life. And so you go nibbling on some promises of some utopia out there, up in the clouds. There is no such thing. There is no God, there is no heaven, there is no afterlife, nothing. You do not know how to face the reality of life. So when I was faced with this during my search, I asked myself, well, if that is the case, what is this thing called reality? What do they mean by reality? Here's Bertrand Russell, who in the previous generation was a very vocal, brilliant philosopher from England. And when they asked him about his stance, this is what he said. It is only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair that the soul's habitation can henceforth be safely built. I read it over and over again. There seemed to be a severe clash of ideas. How could despair form a foundation? And how can unyielding despair ever be safe? It was Quentin Smith, who co-author of Theism, Atheism, and the Big Bang Cosmology, who was even more blunt than this. This is what he said. The only reasonable belief is that we came from nothing, by nothing, and for nothing. My first inclination to that statement was, what is it based on? Why such a wide sweeping statement describing the entire existence of the human race? From nothing, by nothing, for nothing. What was it based on? And I came to a very simple conclusion. It is based on nothing, except a very private and a personal opinion, just like yours and mine. But nothingness is not an easy principle to live by. It is a very hard, exacting principle. And that is why we hear the words of Jean-Paul Sartre. He was a French philosopher, also believed in the same thing. But he decided to describe the reasons why he was an atheist. And after he had set his philosophy step by step, logic by logic, and put it out there, he said, look, I have shown you why atheism is the way to go. That's the only reasonable way to live. And then when he had said it all, he said, one question remains. Why I have not committed suicide yet. Sometimes we smile, but he was not smiling when he wrote those words. They are real. The nothingness of Quentin Smith will pull you to the unyielding despair of Bertrand Russell and drag you to the precipice of Jean-Paul Sartre. But just because somebody was despairing and wanted to yield his life and wanted to commit suicide did not make him or her wrong. Why? Because I knew many people who swore by God or by their religious beliefs. When life became oppressive, they also wanted to commit suicide. Have you seen many of them? Heard of them? Yes, of course. So just because somebody said there is no God and wanted to commit suicide didn't make him wrong. Just because somebody said there is a God and wanted to commit suicide didn't make him or her wrong either. I was still faced with the question, is there or is there not a God in existence? Is there or is there not anything supernatural beyond what we can see, feel, and think? That was the basic question. To that question, there are only two answers. There is a God in existence. There is no God in existence. Many people say, I don't know. That is not an answer. That is a response. And a response probably based on maybe ignorance, or maybe a claim that there just is not sufficient evidence and information to make a decision. But it is not an answer. To the question, is there a God in existence, there are only two answers. One, there is no God, he is fictitious. There is a God, he is factual. I had to address that right at a critical part of my search. Because if that was settled in the way that there was no God in existence, there was no need for me to worry about any of the religions on earth. What use looking for a named river or a lake if the existence of water itself was in question. But before we go to that question, I believe we have to, like I had to make a preparation. And the preparation was twofold. I had to ask what my own mental attitude was, and then I had to create an atmosphere. Now, why these things? Number one, I had to check my own mental attitude. Because all of us, me, you, everyone, has within our minds, blended in there, at least three distinct attitudes. One is the attitude of a believer, two, an attitude of a skeptic, and three, the attitude of an inquirer. And many times we do not know which is the attitude we are bringing to the table at which particular point of time. What are these attitudes? And I am not describing any people. I am describing an attitude that all of us have. The attitude of a skeptic, believer, and inquirer. Let's look at some of the statements that could possibly give us an idea of what I mean by this. A skeptic will dismiss the report prior to thorough investigation. A believer will accept a report prior to thorough investigation, whereas an inquirer will hold verdict till the investigation is done. A skeptic will focus on the question to the exclusion of the evidence. A believer will focus on the evidence to the exclusion of the questions. An inquirer will focus on the weight of evidence. A skeptic will disbelieve in the face of reasonable evidence. A believer will believe in the face of big questions. An inquirer will accept reasonable evidence even if some questions remain, because questions will always remain. There is nobody on earth who can ever stand up and say, I've got it all. Nobody. Our minds are just too small to make such a wide sweeping statement and a claim. So questions will remain. But we were looking for evidence that will sway the pendulum to the side that is most reasonable. That is an inquirer. So, for the few hours that we are going to spend together tonight and tomorrow and the next 2 days, 3 days actually, what attitude shall we bring to this search? The attitude of an inquirer. Remember, it is very difficult to really grasp which attitude you are bringing at any particular time. So we need to remind ourselves often, and I would like you to do that. Often remind yourself, you are not a skeptic, you are not a believer at this point. You are an inquirer. Number 2 of these preparation. How many attempts do you think to gain the top of Mount Everest were successful? 100%? No. 0%? No. Some of them did reach the top. Many of them were stalled halfway or 3/4 of the way, especially as they got to the top, because the atmospheric conditions blocked them. Too much ice, too much snow, too much wind, too deep temperatures, not enough oxygen. And this huge, big expedition had to stop, turn your foot backwards and go back. All that expensive preparation gone. Because the atmospheric conditions were just insurmountable. Fortunately for us, we can create an atmosphere. And I believe there are 4 things we need to create that atmosphere. Number 1, humility. Number 2, honesty. Number 3, calmness. And number 4, respect. All 4 are important. If you miss out on any one of them, it'll become a roadblock. What do I mean by these 4? Number 1, humility. It is paramount. If ever you puff up your chest and say, I know, then you will not know the next thing. The first ingredient of any search, and if you want to join me in that, is to be humble. What do you mean by humble? It's the smallness you feel when standing before the vastness, grandeur, and majesty of truth. We are not even describing what truth, but everybody knows that truth with a capital T is really awesome and great out there. And if you have to stand in front of truth, then you are so small. You are not big. So let's square our shoulders and lift our chins up and say we know it all. Humility is the number one ingredient. Sometimes we do feel humility also when we look at others around us who have a wealth of knowledge. We should become humble. Then our mind is mellowed enough so that when information comes, we are able to accept it as an inquirer. Number 2 is honesty. You know, in my 20 years of search, when I was going through this period, talked to a lot of people. Honesty is a scarce commodity, especially when it comes to religious views. Oh, the way they will say it. Do you know this? Of course. What does it say? Well, I'll tell you. I'll tell you. And in a little while, the words are not all that confident. And then when the evening comes along, when nobody else is listening, if you sit down quietly and say, hey, do you really know? And then they will say, actually, I don't. Then why did you start off so big? Honesty is a scarce commodity. It is widespread. And don't think only they are dishonest. All of us are. I was also when I started out. And I said, hey, that's the way I made all the claims. And so because it's so widespread, so deeply embedded in us, I had to give it a definition, my own definition, and I had to apply that definition rigorously. And here's the definition of honesty. The willingness to give credit to a point or an argument, no matter who brings it up, even if that acknowledgement might destroy my previous standing. Are you ready to be honest? Yeah. I call it the wow factor. We should be ready to say wow if something is impressive. And not first think, shall I say wow or not? Because if I do, then it will destroy what I was holding on to all this while. No. Honesty requires that if there is a piece of information that comes at you, sweeping, strong, and big, then we stand there and say, wow. No matter who gets the credit. Are you with me? Okay. No matter who gets the credit. Wow factor. There will be some wows because, during the search of this extended period, there are many things that I came across that I had to just stand and say, wow. Because I didn't know it was there all along. So when I do it, go ahead and say, wow. Go ahead and say, yeah, pretty good. Or if it's not all that impressive, say, I don't think so. Or if you disagree, no, not with me. Anything as long as you have a response, then you and I are on the same page as inquirers. We are allowed to disagree, but be honest in your disagreement. The third one is calmness. Way back in 1879, Thomas Alva Edison, anybody familiar with that name? He invented the electric bulb. Do you know how many experiments he tried before he got that bulb to burn and brightly? Over 1,028 experiments. One of the problems that he had was trying to balance heat and light in that delicate filament inside the bulb. It would burn, and as it glowed, it would get too hot, and the contact points would break. Or it wouldn't even glow at all. That was his challenge. How would he balance heat and light inside that filament? Do you know religious discussions are exactly the same? It can get so dull and boring that the speaker himself is falling half asleep on his own sentences. Or it can get so bitter and vitriolic, you pull your shoulders this way, I won't talk with you again. Not only I won't talk with you, I'll pull out my guns and my bombs and my rockets. Right? Just go to the Middle East today. It's there. The reason is religious ideas somehow embed themselves pretty deep into our emotions and our hearts. And we do not like it being tugged at all. It hurts. And so you respond and react. And it causes a great deal of emotions. And so we need calmness. The willingness to keep my volatile emotions in check, because I have chosen to be humble and honest. In my humility, I acknowledge I don't know enough. And in my honesty, I state that. And when I say that I don't know, but I'd like to know, then I can remain calm. I don't have to fight for my own views at all. I will just remain calm enough to accept it. Because if we are not calm, then reason and judgment will fly out the window with your emotions. They'll be pushed out. And once reason and judgment are gone, your conclusions will be anything but fair and just. We've got 3. Humility, humbleness, honesty, and you're going to remain calm. Why do we want to remain calm? Like I said, the emotional content of religious ideas run very deep. And our natural inclination is to fight for what we believe. It is natural and it's okay, but not during a search. Not when you are an inquirer. Number 4, respect. Respect is used many times to denote agreement. But respect is not agreement. In fact, respect shines out even brighter when there is disagreement. And you still respect the person. Respect also sometimes is synonymous with admiration. But respect is not necessarily admiration. So it's neither agreement by itself nor admiration. It is simply this, allowing for the other whatever rights we feel is our due. I want to do a search in a certain way, and I should allow anybody else to do a search in their own way. And I would expect, in return, that you give me the same respect. Respect will never allow us to look down our noses at so-and-so and call them insulting names and hurl some insinuation, slip in some damaging insinuations just to knock them off. Or be condescendingly pitiful. No. Respect will allow them the same rights that you wanted for yourself. So these 4, humility, honesty, calmness, and respect. If we have all these 4, I believe we have paved our road with an atmosphere that will take us the distance. But how shall we apply it practically to our meeting and our search? I see you are quite comfortably seated, so I will not ask you to stand up. Usually in the seminars that I present, I ask them, the attendees, to stand up and take some deep breaths. So while you're seated itself, let's take some deep breaths. We need some oxygen going up to our brains. It's the 2-2-4 principle. Take a breath for 2 counts, hold it for 2 counts, and then let it go for 4 counts. Ready? Take a deep breath. 1, 2, hold it. 1, 2, let go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Once again. Take a deep breath. 1, 2, hold. 1, 2, let go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now just pretend you're standing, because that's the ritual that I usually take you through. I'm not going to ask you to stand, so you're okay. But the reason I ask them to stand and take a deep breath is because now we're going to do another little ritual to help us with these 4. And the ritual is this. Draw an imaginary circle around your feet. Done? All right, simple. And now just take your feet out of that circle. All right, now let's ask ourselves what the circle was. The circle is all the philosophies, doctrines, and religion that you now hold. So what you really did was step out of them and join me as a person on the street. no loyalty to any religion, doctrine, or philosophy. Once you go out to the street and become just an ordinary person there, then you are free to inquire. You are free to go any direction that the evidence points to. Are you with me? So you've joined me now on the street. You are not a Hindu, you're not a Muslim, you're not a Buddhist, you're not a Christian, you're not a nobody. Just an ordinary person like me on the street, and from that point we're going to ask the questions that we started out already. We have the first question already. Is there a God or is there not a God in existence? And so let's get on with the question now. We are all inquirers. The great divide, that's what I called it. One side is A, God is non-existent, fictitious. B, God is relevant, factual. Why is the debate going on and on for century after century? I really don't know, but there could be a reason, and I think this is what it is, because of the way we structure the debate. And here is how we normally do it. We take sides first, and then pile up an argument upon an argument for us, for my side, and then point to the other side and knock down their arguments. So there are two columns of argument, mine and yours. But that's because we took a position beforehand. A person who is an inquirer doesn't take a position. He stands back and looks at both of them. And if you do both, then you will have to have 4 columns of argument. You take A and have an argument for A and an argument against A, pro and con. And then you take B and have an argument for B and an argument against B, pros and cons. And an inquirer, when he is faced with 2 options, has 4 lines of argument, whereas normally we just jump into it with 2. And when you have 2, you will not make much headway for the simple reason that there is enough of evidence for both of them, and there are enough of gaps to show that they are not relevant enough. Whereas if you do this, and I call it the pan process, pan meaning going across boundaries. Pan also stands for a process of sifting, trying to differentiate between common sand and the gold. Panning for gold? Yes. The third is Pan, my family name. Pandit, P-A-N, is the first 3 letters of my name. It's a pan process. And I did that for the simple reason that I was on an inquiry mode. It'll keep you there following the pan process. And here it is. Why do we do that? Because there are 2 clear-cut attitudes and claims. Look at the statement here and watch the word precisely. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. That's Richard Dawkins, the most vocal, he's a professor of biology from Oxford, one of the most vocal atheists today. The next sentence is from Patrick Glynn. The seemingly arbitrary and unrelated constants in physics have one strange thing in common. These are precisely, got the word? Precisely the values you need if you want to have a universe capable of producing life. There is no good reason for an intelligent person to embrace the illusion of atheism or agnosticism. Both are using the words precise, referring to facts and evidence, and yet reaching diametrically opposite views. So, we've got evidence obviously on both sides. We've got to do a good check on both sides. So we go to the arguments. The pan process has these 4 arguments for A. A meaning there is no God in existence. And B meaning there is a God in existence. Let's get on with the arguments. Number 1. Option A, God is non-existent. Arguments for that statement, none. Do you know why none? Because the statement is a negative statement. There is no God in existence. There isn't a God in existence. It is a negative statement, and a negative statement is valid only when you have exhausted all the possibilities. Let me give you an example. Suppose I have to state that there is nobody in this room by the name of John Smith. How many people should I be familiar with in the room? Everybody. And only after I've gone to every one of you and got your name can I make that statement. I usually give another example because a mighty big long name is the longest name in the United States. Suppose there are 10,000 lakes in the United States, and I say there is not a single lake by the name Chargogagog Manchaugagog Chaubanagan Gamaug. That's a real lake. That's a real name. It's in the Native American language. It's a lake up in Massachusetts. And the translation of that is, I fish on my side of the lake and you fish on your side of the lake and nobody fishes in between. Chargogagog Manchaugagog Chaubanagan Gamaug. Just suppose, I just throw it in for trivia. Just suppose we say there's no lake, none of the 10,000 lakes in the United States has that name. How many lakes should I be familiar with? Will 9,999 do? No. You must know all the 10,000 lakes, and only then will that negative statement be valid. Let's translate that concept to this idea of God. If we are going to say there is no God in existence, then well, let's first take the claim that there might be a God in existence. And if there is a God in existence, then there might be a location for him. He might be located somewhere. Are you familiar with every nook and corner of the state in which you live? Country? How about the world? Been to the moon? What if he has set up his office on the dark side of the moon? Been to the sun, 93 million miles away? Been to any of the other suns? Do you know how many other suns there are in our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy? 100 billion stars. Been to any of them? That's one galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy. If we ask the astronomers, how do they guesstimate how many galaxies there are in the universe? Do you know how many there might be? What is the guesstimated number of galaxies in the universe? They look up, in one angle and then calculate the area there and then extrapolate it to the rest of the universe. 125 billion galaxies. Been to any of them? Even if you had gone to 99% of the galaxies, there would still be a billion galaxies still to go to. By what stretch of imagination can we now say there is nothing out there that I can call God? What if he is there, somewhere there? And therefore, we say that a statement in the negative cannot be valid until you have exhausted all the possibilities. Furthermore, if you and I can walk around, move, don't you think if there's a God, he also could move around? Just a simple logical question. If I can move, don't you think he can move? Of course he should be able to move if he gave me the ability. Well, then, if I go looking for him in Canada, he may have gone to India. And if I go looking up the North Pole, he may have found his way down here to Australia. So for me to say he is not anywhere, are you with me? For me to say that he is not anywhere, not only should I know and be familiar with every point, I should be at every point at the same time. Knowing every point is known as omniscience, and being at every point is known as omnipresence. These are the attributes we give to God. So for me to really stand up here and say there is no God in existence, I must have the attributes of God. It's a tangled knot. And there are no arguments in that column. Number 2 is arguments against B. B is the claim that there is a God in existence. And the arguments against that are these. I found 4. You will find many if you do your own search. I found these 4. Lack of empirical evidence. What's empirical evidence? Straightforward, direct evidence. Feeling, touching, hearing, tasting. Empirical evidence. Yes. I don't have empirical evidence for God's existence. I don't. So it could possibly be an argument. Because we don't see, don't hear, maybe he's not in existence. Yes, it's an argument. But it does not cover all of what we know. Because there are so many other things that I don't see or feel or taste, but I know it exists. Right? Like my mind, my own brain. I don't feel or taste it. My stomach, I don't. And yet, I know it exists. I don't know, I don't have any empirical evidence that water is H2O. But I still believe it, and hundreds of scientists believe it, and it works in science. So yes, empirical evidence is lacking, but lack of that empirical evidence is not a huge, big argument. It could be, but it's not big. Pain and suffering is a big one. There's so much of pain and suffering. So how can anybody say there's a God in existence? It is a tough one, and I will acknowledge it immediately. But on closer evaluation, the presence of pain and suffering is not an argument against the existence of God. It is an argument against the type of God we are claiming there to be, not the existence. Because the God that might be out there is a bad God then. Maybe he does cause pain and suffering, but he's a God anyway. So presence of pain and suffering is not an argument against God, but against the type of God or his attributes, not his existence. Number 2, pain and suffering are not the entire spectrum of our experiences on earth. We do experience pain and suffering, but we also experience exquisite joys and pleasures, don't we? All right, then let's be fair. If pain and suffering point to a situation in which there is no God, then what do those exquisite pleasures and joys point to? Yeah? It's a simple argument. And at best, they will cancel each other. So we still are not making a strong enough argument. The same thing with number 3, bad design and lack of design. Yes, there is randomness in some of the place experience that we face. You go out to a hillside. How are the rocks over there? In random manner. What are the trees in the jungle? In random manner. How can you explain a little child who got leukemia? Is there a real logical explanation why this little child got leukemia? You stand there nonplussed, deep in grief. There is no explanation. It seems random. Sure, there are places where there is no explanation at all. And yet, again, that is not the last or the only experience that we go through. There's not only just randomness in everything. There is so much of design in our world. And the design is just not ordinary. The design sometimes is so complex and precise that we are amazed. So if there is in one area randomness, no design, and that points to non-existence of God, then what do all the huge, beautiful, intricate, complex design point to? Again, they'll cancel each other. They don't stand. Number 4 is difficulty with the concept of creation. That's a tough one too. And because of 2 factors. It is not consistent with any observable phenomenon. I have never seen anyone snap his fingers and a whole mountain range just comes up as created. Have you? No. It is not an observable phenomenon. Number 2, it is not in conformity with any scientific law. I cannot appeal to a scientific law to say that that is how creation took place. So it is just a claim. And we have to leave it at that. Yes, it is difficult. But just because we can't explain that doesn't throw it out. It just says that we are deficient in being able to explain it. These 2 points are pretty strong, showing that there is more that we need to establish that statement in fact or in evidence, and therefore we do rest on what is known as belief or faith. Granted that. So we have our arguments on that side. Argument on one column, argument on two. Let's get on to the other side now, to arguments 3 and 4. The option is now B. God does exist, and what are the pros and cons there? Circumstantial, anthropic, and logical analysis, and what else you see on the board. Let's go to circumstantial. Billions believe in God. If there's only one person who tells me that he or she saw a little cow with the heads on both sides of the body, I'll say, yeah, give me another one. But if 10 people say, no, we did see a little cow with 2 heads, one on this side and one on the other side, I'll say, yes. If 200 people tell me that they did see it, then I'll start scratching my head and saying, I wonder. If 10,000 people tell me that they did see it, then I believe in all honesty, I should shift my mind from disbelief to at least there being a possibility. That is the meaning of circumstantial evidence. It is not a proof. It just shows that there is a possibility. It's not 10,000. It's billions who believe in God, who are willing to say, I know from inside that there is a God in existence. So I must not stand and say, whoosh, and wipe it off. The correct, honest way would be to say, is that a big number? Then, well, I wonder if it's possible. And that's it. Number 2, it's very deep in human psyche, in the human mind. Our history of the human race that we can go back to reaches about 5,000 years. And in all these 5,000 years, written, or at least claimed to be written, there has never been even one generation on this earth in our entire history where the idea of the supernatural has been wiped off. Never, not even one single generation. It is so deep, and if something lasts for 10 years, we must give it some credibility, don't you think? If that same idea lasts for a century, then there is a certain credibility that is inherent right there. If it lasts for thousands of years in billions of people's minds, then I believe the correct way to look at it is there's a possibility. Number 3 is the presence of design. Like we said just a moment ago, it is not design that is bitty and small. It is precise. It is complex. It is huge. And right here I might appeal to another science, the science of archaeology. Have you ever heard of an archaeologist who very carefully goes to his dig and brushes off the dust from a little ornate pillar, for instance, with nice markings there? And he says this is a prize find in his dig, and he brings it to his table and puts it there, stands back, and he said, happened by itself. Never. From a broken piece of pottery, an archaeologist looking at those markings and the color and whatever else he wants to look at will tell you when it was made, which country, possibly the language the person spoke, his social status, maybe his financial status too. Why do we give him that credibility? Because of the very simple, logical, stepwise approach that anything that is a design requires the explanation of having a designer somewhere along the way. If you see a design, there must be a designer. And that is why he will brush off the dirt, but keep this pillar. The dirt obviously does not have a design. He is not interested in that. The pillar has a design. And so when he looks at a design, he starts working on the idea of who the designer is. And that is why we have so much of historical evidence of our past. Because you see any design, it calls for a designer. And the characteristics of the designer. The fact is really, he threw off the dirt. And what if I tell you, or what if I tell the archaeologist, if you look carefully into dirt and look at the molecules that form the dirt, there is a precise design in the dirt itself. Then shouldn't the archaeologist go looking for the designer of that as well? Yes, of course. Any design, if you did it at that place, why do you not do it in this place too? So to be consistent, any design, your first bet shouldn't be that it happened by itself. You must look for the designer. And the design, right, is anything but small. If there's a broken vase, can you look just at the jagged edge and say there's no design here? A broken vase is still a vase. Why? Because despite the broken edge, you see design in the rest of it. In other words, if any phenomenon, if any place has design and non-design within it, then the design takes precedence. And you do look for a designer. But these are all only circumstantial evidences. We go to anthropic principle. This word anthropos means human. It was coined by Brandon Carter, a British physicist, and it talks about those factors that allow humans or life to exist on any planet. Factors that contribute to and sustain human life on a planet. We're going to look at two of them, maintenance of life and conditions for research. Maintenance of life. The expansion rate. Do you know that our universe is expanding? And it is expanding at a certain rate. If it goes a little slower or a little faster, life would be impossible. And look what the number is. Take the expansion rate of the universe, which is fine-tuned to 1 part in a trillion, 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 trillion. That is, if it were changed by 1 part in either direction, a little faster, a little slower, we could not have a universe that would be capable of supporting life. Just the expansion rate. Gravity. It's incomprehensibly narrow range. The strongest nuclear force in nature is called the strong nuclear force, which holds protons and the neutrons together in the center of an atom. That is the strongest force that we know in nature. The weakest force that we know in nature is gravity. Even a little ant will lift a leaf against gravity. It's the weakest force in nature. Now suppose you draw a line and put millimeter marks on the line and draw the line out from here around the world and go off to the moon and onto the sun 93 million miles away and go clean across our galaxy and swing this line out to the 10,000th galaxy. Now it's gone past our minds. Millimeter marks on this line. Then the scale of the power that's in the universe, the spectrum is, if the strong nuclear force is way out on the 10,000th galaxy, gravity is on millimeter number 1. That's the spectrum. Now what will happen if you shift gravity to millimeter 2 on that line that goes from here to the 10,000th galaxy? All you're going to shift it is from 1 millimeter to 2. Do you know what will happen? Our Earth, which is 7,000 miles in diameter, will shrink to a globe that is only 40 miles in diameter. All life will cease. If you just shift gravity to the second millimeter mark, and that is why they say that gravity has an incomprehensibly narrow range for life to exist. If The fine-tuning of this statement, I didn't put it up there, but this is called the cosmological constant. Don't worry about these big names. The cosmological constant is just the density of matter in space, the whole of space. The density of matter has to be a very correct amount. If it is too much, all matter will collapse, all galaxies will collapse. If it is too little, they'll all fly apart. It has to be very fine-tuned to a billion, 100 million, billion, 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 billion. That's the number. So in other words, it moves one mark away, gone. Who is controlling all of that? When you combine the two, gravity and cosmological constant, the fine-tuning would be to precision of 1 part in 100 million, trillion, 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 trillion. That would be the equivalent of one atom in the entire known universe. Take all the atoms. Look, in my body itself, I'm not a big guy. I have about 75 trillion cells. 75 trillion cells, not atoms, cells. So you line up all these cells and then break them up into atoms and line all the atoms, yours, mine, the trees, the mountains, the seas, this earth, moon, planets, everything, 125 billion galaxies. And if the needle was supposed to be on atom number 510, that's where it is. It is not on 509, it's not on 511. Fine-tuned, absolutely fine-tuned. How about a situation? Now it's not a place like, front row, and I don't want to sit in the front row here, I want to sit in the side here. No, it's a position in the galaxy. Our position in the galaxy. We happen to be situated safely between the Sagittarius and Perseus spiral arms. I cannot come up with an example of another place in the galaxy that is as friendly to life as our location. Any other place will have too much of radiation, for instance, and we would cease to exist. It's only in the very inner edge of the circumstellar habitable zone, that is, the distance from the sun, in which we have low enough carbon dioxide and high enough oxygen to sustain complex animal life and human life like yours and mine, and that's where we are. Who put us there? Over the past 30 years or so, scientists have discovered that just about everything about the basic structure of the universe is balanced on a razor's edge for life to exist. Conditions for research. Do you know that this earth is, according to what we can observe in the universe, the only place in the universe where you can see and experience a total solar eclipse? The moon is 232,000 miles away from us, and it occupies an area in the sky that much. The sun is 400 times the mass of the moon, and it is exactly 400 times away. And so it also occupies the exact same area in the sky. And that is why we can have a total solar eclipse, because they occupy the exact same area in the atmosphere. So what's so great about a total solar eclipse? Well, scientists tell us that it is the only phenomenon during which they can study the color spectrum of our sun. A certain color spectrum is available only during a solar eclipse, a total solar eclipse. And because of that, we can extrapolate and study other stars. So, conditions for research. Not only that, Einstein's theory of relativity is a theory and a mathematical calculation and a formula that relates to all existence of the whole universe. This is the existence of matter in a total solar eclipse. That is the only phenomenon where you can observe one part of Einstein's theory of relativity, which says gravity can bend light. Can you imagine that? This earth is the only place where you can have an observable part of Einstein's theory of relativity. Nowhere else. In every other place in the universe, it will be a theory. Here, we can observe it because there is a total solar eclipse going on. And why? Because these bodies are exactly positioned in the distance they are and the size they are. Amazing? Amazing? Wow? No? It's that incredible coincidence that creates a perfect match. How about our location? Our location away from the galaxy's center in the flat plane of the disk provides us with a particularly privileged vantage point for observing both nearby and distant stars. The very composition of our atmosphere gives it transparency. If not, we wouldn't have been able to observe anything outside our Earth. It is this, that we find a universe where the very places where we find observers are also the very best over places for observing. That is surprising. I see design in this pattern of habitability, meaning the factors that allow us to live, and measurability, the factors that allow us to do scientific measurements.